Hello and welcome back to Empathy at the Table. Today we have a very exciting guest. Her name is Aline Badr. She is a global executive coach and a brand advisor. She helps C-suite and high potential leaders develop their leadership reputations for lasting influence and impact. She moved from North America all the way to Europe, and with her full-on style of coaching and communication, she has quickly made an impact on top companies and leaders. I'm looking forward to a deep dive conversation today. Aline Badr, welcome to Empathy at the Table. Hi, Aline.
Hi, Tony.
So, Aline, let's start with understanding, what attracted you to the business of building reputations?
Hmm. Um, what attracted me to the business of building reputations? I think if I really think about this, I didn't know that I was going into the building reputations business. But as far as I can remember, with my career, I started as a creative person, right? As a graphic designer, as an advertiser. And we're talking 27 years ago now, right? And ever since then, it feels like if I was to really connect the dots, it feels like I've been telling stories, right? I've been telling stories through visual. Then I moved into marketing. Then it was marketing events and communication. It's always a way of telling stories, of shaping some kind of a perception to the public. And when I got into PR is when I started to understand that there is a machine of how to build, reputations from a PR perspective. And, this is when I really became aware that there is something valuable about having a reputation and then building it. And then I realized, I think that PR had a plateau in terms of how do you build a reputation. And this is when I started to really get into coaching and building, the reputation model that I did, which stands differently than building reputations from everything else that I had done, in the past when it became, about telling stories. So I think that's kind of how, I got into this idea of reputations.
So it's an involvement. It wasn't like that, at school, you'd always wanted to get into the business of, building reputations or marketing, Mad Men, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I know there are people that exist that are like that, where they go to school and they have exactly the idea of what they're going to become and who they're going to become and what they're going to do for work. That was never me. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and, it was a natural progression to study business. And when I was studying business, I focused on advertising because it was my creative side. It was one way that I could pick something out of business, that, would match who I am. And so I didn't know, had no idea, had no idea that I was building reputations when I was developing ad campaigns. You don't really think about it that way.
Mm.
And then
Yeah, I mean,
your career.
yeah, I didn't actually know there was a science behind building reputations. I mean, do people know this? Do they seek do they seek experts to do that, or how does it work?
Sure. I mean, there are reputation management firms,
Wow.
and when you get into PR space, when you have a corporate communication department inside of a company, or you have an agency that deals with PR or they deal with reputation management, it all falls under this idea of how do you protect your name? How do you protect your brand? And from a corporate communication perspective and a reputation management perspective, it's about also crisis management. So building your reputation enough so that when there is a crisis, you can manage it properly. Or, you might not have a reputation, but then you need a crisis management strategy, and that will help you then build a reputation. So certainly it's a huge business.
So do they only need reputation builders when there's a problem?
That's the work that I am now into, is
Wow.
that build your reputation and actively, take part in building your reputation so that when there is a crisis, and by the way, there's always going to be a crisis. The level of crisis is depending on the industry and the business that you're in, but every leader is going to go into some kind of a conflict, whether it's private or public. And so how do you protect your reputation inside that conflict or inside the crises is my passion now, is really what my purpose is about, and how I kind of evolved into this space.
So what are some key mistakes that people make when it comes to building their reputations?
I think, well, first of all, that they don't build their reputations. I think one of the easiest answer that I have to this question is a lot of people don't really consider it, when they are building a business, particularly, if you're in the startup phase, or even if you are a CEO of a, a large, organization. They think that, it's PR, it's really managing it from a public relations perspective, but it really is so much more to that. So I think one is that they don't actively build it. And that's partly because they don't really value it as much. And I mean, there are so many, authors and subject matter experts that really tell us that, reputation is your currency. I mean, there's a great quote by Warren Buffett that says, it takes you 20 years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. So, you work so hard and your reputation is based on your work, but something happens and you can literally lose it in 5 minutes. And so taking an active role, in it, in building it, is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. And I think, one of the main distinguished thing that I took away from PR and what I do now is that when you're doing PR strategies, you're putting your reputation in the hands of the public. You're shaping the perception based on what you tell people about yourself. Whether you do, a press conference, a press release, whether you write a book, etc., all of those things. You really are putting the power and the control in the hands of the public, which is relatively true. I think Richard Branson, it was Richard Branson that said, your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room, which is so true. It's like, if you ask somebody, what are people telling you about me? That's pretty much your reputation. But my thing now is that really take an active role in putting yourself out there so that when people are talking about you when you're not in the room, they have valid information. They don't have, he or she said this about this person. They can actually go to where you are telling, your story, and they can get information straight from you, even if they don't know you and even if you're not in the room. So
it's about building your own brand as a leader.
Absolutely. It is truly your currency, because I've seen it happen so many times, in the leadership space, when there's a crisis that happens. And again, like we said, a crisis can be small or big, or, it could be a public or a private situation. You really want to build a brand so that when these things happen, you have your own channel to speak from. You're not relying on PR agencies, or you're not relying on the media as much. You still will. It's not a dead industry. But I think that you really need to identify that your own brand is one great way of marketing who you are and your business, and a way to save your reputation when things happen. Or if, let's say, nothing bad has happened, because I don't want the whole conversation to be about, something's bad's going to happen. So build reputation. But even if you have something to announce, something to say, something to share, your brand now becomes a channel from which you can tell, your story. And so it really is a phenomenal strategy, to start, building, when you're in business.
I mean, when you explain it like that, it sounds actually very empowering to the individual, right? To take control of the narrative that they're saying. In this day and age, there's so many people now working in the leadership space and offering their services and their skill sets to leaders. For you, why is it so important that you work in this space?
For me, it's important because I'm coming at it so differently now, having been in this business for 27 years. I don't want to just build reputations from a PR strategy. I want to build reputations that stand the test of time. I think when I really have grown into my industry and I've worked with so many leaders, I've always known that influence and impact is really what they want more than anything else. And so how do you help them have influence and impact over, time? or despite the crises that might happen, or the change, or whatever situation that could happen, that they can have control over their reputation. And that for me resulted in a difference that I offer to leaders, which is not just build your visibility or build your brand from a PR perspective, which is still valid, but really spend the time to get to know who you are, really get the clarity of who you are, so that when you are shaping these stories for the public consumption, then they are coming from a place of honesty. And a place of honesty, no one can rob you of, right? No one can actually change. That's your way of controlling the narrative. But you've got to really know who you are. You've got to really know what your values are. You've got to know what your blind spots are. You've got to know what you offer the world and what you stand for, and then communicate it. Oftentimes in the business world, we put these strategies, we project more than we are. And I'd like to build leaders that really are who they are, and then you put them out there in the public, and they have that flexibility to change, to adapt their behavior, to get their validation from themselves, not from the public. So it's less about the public. It's more about involving yourself, who you are, and collaborating with the public to create that reputation.
So for people listening now, thinking, I need to really, as a leader, really need to kind of start working on myself. What kind of tips could you give them just as a start? Obviously, they will contact you, obviously, but aside from contacting Aline, what could they do to jump on that, on that runway to becoming great leaders?
Yes, it's so interesting you asked me that question. I think one of the things that most people don't have in front of them is what is it that they want or who they are. Right? I think a lot of us know who we don't want to be or what we don't want to do, but a lot of people don't really know who they are or what they want. And so really adopting a reflective practice is one of the easiest way to begin this journey of self-awareness and adapting your behavior and getting your credibility in the public space. It starts with you getting to know who you are. So asking yourself powerful questions like, who am I? What do I want? What is it that I'm trying to change in this world? What is my business standing for? Like really trying to figure out the common denominator between who you are as a person and what you're trying to do, in the business world or with your team. Really a simple step, not an easy step, but it is a step. It is a step towards really starting to scratch the surface of knowing who you are, so that you can begin that journey of recognizing, okay, this is what I lack, for the thing that I want, this is what I lack, this is what I need to develop, and this is what I need to do in order to build it. But gaining that clarity is important.
Yeah, I guess as I'm hearing you speak, the questions are simple but powerful.
Yes.
And I guess the real kind of trick there is sticking around and creating space to hear the answers, right?
Yes. Wonderful you said that, Tony. Thank you for bringing that, because I think consistency is key. I think for me, just personally, aside from business or being a coach, I think anything that you do in life, if you stick with it, you will get a result. Just one of my main beliefs that I believe, if you just stick with it, you will get result. And I think no matter the difficulty, right? And obviously we've established, asking yourself these powerful questions are not necessarily an easy thing to do, but they're quite effective thing to do, and sticking to it and continue to push the limit of your powerful questions is really important.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about questions, so that segues beautifully into our common area, right? Where we cross over, which is in the world of emotionally intelligent negotiation. When I talk about this to companies and to individuals, I'm greeted by two reactions. One reaction is, I know we need to bring that level of IQ and EQ into the way we negotiate. And recently somebody said to me, if you came to my company to talk to me about emotional intelligence, we'd probably tell you to ride out on the horse that you rode in on. So I'm curious to see in your world, in your industry, with your type of clients, when you talk about bringing emotional intelligence into the way they have these potentially conflictive conversations and negotiations? What are you seeing? What kind of reactions?
Yes, I think I get similar reactions when I talk about self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness. It's like, oh yes, of course, we need to be self-aware, but it's impossible at work. I think, we know that these are what most companies, most businesses would say they are the nice to have skills. They're the soft skills. They're not the important skills. But we know time and time again, and years now of you doing your work and me doing my work, that this is actually needed. These are actually the real skills. And so for me, when I hear negotiation and how I relate it to my clients, it really is a tough sell, because most people assume that negotiation is you win some, you're gonna, if you win, the other is gonna lose.
Right,
But
right,
it's so not that. But this is where they stop. They
right.
stop at that. And so I think in my world of developing influence or developing, reputation, it's similar. It's like, I'm not really sure, if I'm going to influence somebody, then they're going to lose something. And so
Right.
I think that's common. The common thing that I get is, perhaps
Yeah.
it's a nice thing. I would love to know how to negotiate, or I'd love to know how to influence, but I've got other things to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you use the term influence and negotiation interchangeably because, as I see it, negotiation is a strand of influence, right? It's a way in which you influence, and using emotional intelligence in the way in which we do that is the difference between having a great outcome and maybe something that's suboptimal. What about you? What's your negotiation style like? How many times a day do you negotiate?
I mean, if you're asking me if I'm negotiating with another person, or for me, it's more the negotiation that I have with myself,
Okay.
every day, go to the gym, don't go to the gym, eat the
Yeah.
chocolate, don't eat
Yeah.
the chocolate, drink more water, don't drink, you know what I mean? Like, don't drink coffee. So it really is the questions that I have to ask myself, all the time when I negotiate with myself is what helps me. Okay, why am I telling myself to drink more water? What's the big picture here? What is it that I'm trying to get at? I think this is how I negotiate, with myself, is taking a little bit of a higher view rather than really being focused on this, win or lose, like, oh my God, I'm not going to have coffee today, or, I don't really want water. It's bigger than that. So
Hmm.
that's how I kind of get into, influencing myself or negotiating with myself to, all of the examples that I gave you.
And in business, how does that translate to how you interact with potential clients, vendors? How does
Sure.
that work?
Yes, I think, one of the biggest thing as well, which is not so different, to be honest with you, with the person,
Hmm.
is seeing the other person, like seeing,
Hmm.
allowing that space, allowing that time,
Hmm.
to really hear, to really listen, to see the other person. So it's really not just about what I want out of the negotiation, but it's also what they want out of the negotiation. And how do we collaborate together? I think this is the language that I use sometimes, when I talk about influences, it's really a collaboration. If you think about a business, it's really being created by people. The visionary might have the vision, but now you need people, to negotiate with people, to influence them into action, to
Yeah.
inspire
Yeah.
them into action. And the only way to do that, if they are winning as well as you are, right? And
Yeah.
to get them to win, you have to know what's important to them,
Yeah.
right? And so hearing, listening, understanding, having a belief system that it's a collaboration. It's just not just for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this, I mean, it sounds such a nirvana, doesn't it? If everyone could understand
Yes.
this, and then, but the challenge is, it makes sense to us in our logical brains, but like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Then you're faced with the reality where you have to actually negotiate under pressure. Um, somebody's coming at you with in a heated manner,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to kind of revert back to being, an old style kind of Neanderthal negotiator. But what you're saying is there's another way, right? Trying to understand what it is that's behind what's driving them.
Absolutely. And it takes with being active.
Yeah.
learning how to negotiate,
Mm.
learning how to develop your reputation, develop your influence. You have to really be active in those things. I think you can't wait until the crisis happens.
Mm.
I think if you do, you will revert back to whatever limiting belief you're in or whatever blind spot you're in. Right. And so that's a dangerous place to be in, because you can lose your reputation, or you can lose the deal, or you
Mm.
can lose the
Mm.
negotiation in a heartbeat. So the important thing to do is to really build those skills as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
As soon as you're hearing us talk about this, really get on to really starting to learn how to negotiate, because it's an important skill to have, because you just don't know when you're going to be in a, people talk about being lucky. Lucky is just being, having the opportunity and being prepared for it. It's
Mm.
not just the opportunity, because a lot of us have many opportunities come to our, to our face or in our area of business, but we're not ready for it.
Mm.
Right? So it's focus on how do you become ready? How do you become
Mm.
ready for these types of negotiations or these kind of deals or these kind of, ways that you want to influence people into action?
I try all the time to practice the art of active listening.
Mm-hmm.
I write on sticky pad notes, and I'll pin them on my before a call. I'll pin them on my computer, or I'll put them up on the wall, and I'll just remember, active listen, be quiet, silence, quiet. Sometimes I just like shut up, right? Just I put it up on the wall to remind me. What tips do you have for active listening, learning how to get better at that skill?
Yes, I think silence is really key. I think if you flip the words, listen, it's silent, and it really is a really great, way to do that, and to really just get out of your head, to focus. And one way to do that, focus on the other person's eyes, focus on their face, focus on the sound that's coming out of, their mouth.
Mm.
That stops you, from thinking about yourself. But, one of the things that I do is I build that skill with myself. Like, can I be quiet enough to hear my thought? Can I challenge myself? You know what I mean? To hear that thought. So really developing those things can start with the self. It can start with you listening to
Mm.
yourself
Mm.
without,
Mm.
coming up with a solution right away or coming up with the answer right away. Just,
Mm.
pausing and allowing space for you to really, really hear yourself, then starts to really give you that skill when you're talking to someone else. To same, be quiet, pause, don't come to a solution. But it is not an easy thing to do most times, because especially in leadership, the leaders get to that place of leadership, they go, I need to help, I need to help, I need to, like,
Right, right.
solutions, give advice. Really, that's not what they need. Right. And I think if you really change your mindset and go, me helping is by me actually allowing that person to think for themselves.
Mm.
Helping is not me giving the answer. Right.
Mm.
So you have to change those mindsets a little bit, and in order to listen and help the other person develop.
Fantastic. And so what are you, let's talk leaders, right? So what is it you're seeing right now in the leadership field? What are you working on? Just give us a feel for where Aline is right now.
I mean, sure, I continue, to develop leadership from my model that I created, which is, the 3 C's of influential reputations, have the clarity and the confidence and the credibility. So I take my clients on that program. I also teach, leadership, and I facilitate, and I do different workshops and such. And I think part of your question, I think, was, perhaps I heard it that way. I don't know, Tony, but I like what's happening in leadership in general. Or
Yeah, yeah.
maybe it's the question that I really want to answer.
Okay, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but I think what's happening in leadership is really interesting, because coaching, if you really look at the industry of coaching for leaders, everything used to be on the hush hush. It's like, if you hire a coach, that means you have a problem. It's,
Mm.
oh my God, don't tell anyone. Or an HR department will ask you to get a coach, and you're like, oh my God, I have an issue, that I need to solve. And I think I'm starting to really see a shift, where there's an acceptance, like, no, this is actually helping me. I'm actually developing, my professional skills. I'm developing myself. And so that's an interesting shift that I'm seeing, in the history of leadership.
I definitely would concur with that. It's gone from being on the outskirts, right, the hinterland of of corporate business and leadership. It was something very much unspoken, but now I almost feel that some leaders are quite proud, right? They wear the fact that they have a coach, right? You hear them saying, "Well, I spoke to my coach last week," and as a coach, and I know you do this, I do this, is when we're coaching people, we actually encourage them to share that with some of their stakeholders. So because they need to be able to, if they're coaching people, if they're leading people, it's the people they're leading that would give them that kind of direct feedback on how they're improving, so you can have some points of reference. So I think, yeah, that's a really healthy shift.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy for it.
Yeah. And tell me about your experience with cultures, because I know you've been in the North America, you had clients there, you've now moved to Europe. What are
Yes.
you seeing in the difference in leadership with these two cultures?
There's always going to be an opportunity, no matter the culture, is what I'm realizing. I certainly do see every culture has a different personality when it comes to leadership. You have North America that, very risky. They take a lot of, risk. They, much more open on, this idea of professional development, much more vocal about it. You have the Middle East, you have Africa, you have Europe, like certainly every place has a different personality when it comes to leadership. But the common denominator is that every business is, at the end of the day, looking to figure out their people, situation, across the board. Whether people come at it quicker than others, it really doesn't matter. But the general sort of thing is that at some point, every business realizes it's the people and the people's development that is one of the biggest things that will, increase the level of success that a business would have. So across all cultures, it really is the same thing. But perhaps it's the cadence in which they accept that. That's the biggest difference.
And one thing we haven't touched upon is, I know as a coach, I for the listeners, I know Aline personally, and as you see her with all this energy, if you can see her online, if you can hear her, I'm sure you can feel her energy. That you put everything into what you do, and one of the things that I know that's really key to the way in which you interact with the world is you find it really important to take time to be away from everyone and spend time on your own, with your own thoughts. Just tell us, you've just come off like a mini sabbatical. Tell us about that habit and how that works for you.
Yes, I think we briefly spoke about it, which is this idea that you really, if you listen to yourself, you are beginning to develop the skills of listening to others, or being there for others. Because when you're really challenging yourself and facing yourself and really being silent with yourself, you're able to then really be that for someone else. And so for me, the concept of self-connection and self-awareness are really my value system. Like, I wouldn't be Aline, if I wasn't connecting to myself, more times than not, or if I wasn't really continuing the work of developing, my awareness. And by the way, you don't develop it and then you have it. We evolve. And so it's a continuous practice of getting to know yourself, so you can be as self-actualized for the world as possible. And what I found, in all areas of my life, personally, professionally, is that when someone is very aware of themselves, when someone has that connection to themselves, they're able to see past, what could be perceived difficulty, right? And still stand. I'm not saying that it won't be difficult. I'm just saying that you might have a little bit more ability to, move through life, by doing that. So certainly, I probably spend more alone time than the average person. I don't know where that comes from, Tony, to be honest with you. Perhaps because I'm the youngest of seven and everybody's in their own life and I kind of feel like I'm in my own little world and and I have to figure it out. Perhaps it's that, I don't know, but I'm glad for it because it gave me that observation skill, observing myself and then observing others. And so I just can't see a world where you can comment on someone else without having commented on yourself first. Yeah. I just don't want to live in that world, right? So I want to be responsible about, my person, my energy, what I contribute to the world. And so I do that by really a lot of, time by myself and reflection.
Aline, just to finish off, how can our listeners find you? Where's the best way to connect with you, learn more about you?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, my website, is the easiest thing is www.alinebadr.com. So that's ALINEBADR.com. Also on LinkedIn, I write content on LinkedIn and, certainly contact me there and I'd be more than happy to connect.
Aline Badr, thank you very much for joining us today at the table. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Tony. Thank you for doing all of this. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Aline, for such a wonderful conversation. I can still feel your energy in the room. We hope Aline's insights into leadership and personal branding have been very helpful to you. To our listeners, if Aline's insights resonated with you, please make sure that you like this episode and subscribe to our channel for more enlightening conversations. Don't forget to share with your friends and family, and feel free to comment in the review. We love to hear your thoughts. I'm Tony Anagor, and this is Empathy at the Table.